The council chamber aboard the orbital station Aegis Prime was designed to intimidate. Its vaulted ceiling shimmered with a false sky that mimicked the light of 3 suns, casting sharp shadows across the polished obsidian floor. Transparent panels at the edge revealed the endless sweep of space and the glimmering fleets docked nearby. Human cruisers in silver-white formation, and the far larger, jagged ships of the Veari Dominion. At the center of the chamber, the negotiation table stretched like a black river of glass. Seated along one side were the humans, diplomats in sleek formal suits woven with fiber optics that pulsed faintly, signaling their bio-read interfaces, generals wearing exoskeletal braces that enhanced their already formidable presence, and finally, the soldiers, honored guests, silent and rarely acknowledged. Among them was Lieutenant Daniel Reeve, a decorated veteran of the Battle of Cryon Ridge. Reeve didn't belong here, not really. He wasn't a politician. He was a field man, scarred by years of conflict, more at home in the cockpit of a strike craft than in a room filled with shimmering holograms and political theater. Yet here he was, seated at the edge of history, because the Veari insisted a warrior of standing from the human side be present as witness. They expected a champion, a representative of Earth's martial spirit. Instead they got him, quiet, thoughtful, haunted by what war had cost. Across from him, the Veari delegation radiated tension. Towering figures with scaled skin of deep cobalt, eyes glowing faintly with bioluminescent rings. Their armor was ceremonial, but the sharp ridges of their gauntlets and spines made them look perpetually ready for combat. And at the forefront of their line sat her, Commander Sharel of the Crimson Fong, a warrior whose name was sung in alien ballads and whispered as a warning by her enemies. Taller than Reeve by at least a head, she was a vision of coiled strength and lethal grace, her braided hair bound in copper clasps, her armor polished to a dull gleam that spoke of countless battles. The scars across her face were not hidden, but proudly displayed, each one earned in combat. It was said that Sharel had never bowed to anyone, not even her own king. The negotiations had dragged on for hours, words tossed like knives. Trade routes, disputed colonies, reparations for skirmishes, all of it tangled in webs of pride and suspicion. Tensions reached their peak when one Veari lord hissed a threat at the human delegation, slamming a clawed fist against the table, the sharp crack reverberating like a gunshot. Reeve had tensed, his soldiers' instincts sparking, but the diplomats around him barely flinched. This was their battlefield. Then Sharel stood. The chamber fell silent, as if the air itself froze. Her heavy boots echoed as she crossed the floor, every movement a predator's glide. Reeve felt his pulse climb, his breath shallow. She wasn't moving toward the diplomats or generals. She was moving toward him. Reeve's training screamed at him to stand, to be ready for an attack. But something in her eyes, glowing with intensity but not rage, rooted him in place. The entire council watched in a stunned hush as she stopped before him. And then, without a word, she dropped to one knee. The motion was sharp, deliberate. Her clawed hands pressed to the floor, her head bowed low. To a human, it could be mistaken for a soldier's salute or an archaic show of respect. But the sudden gasps from the Veari delegation revealed the truth. Among them, bowing was not mere respect. It was absolute submission, a public declaration that the one bowed to was master, protector, and chosen. The room erupted in murmurs. Veari generals snarled in outrage, their spines flaring in disbelief. One slammed a fist on the table hard enough to crack the obsidian surface. Another hissed venom, calling her traitor. Reeve just stood there, frozen. His mind scrambled, grasping for logic. Why him? He hadn't spoken a word. He hadn't even moved. He was no diplomat, no leader of fleets, no political figurehead. He was just a soldier. A man who had seen too much blood, who carried too many ghosts. And yet here she was, one of the most feared warriors of her people, bowing before him as if he were some kind of savior. His heart pounded. He wanted to tell her to rise, to stop this madness before it spiraled further. But when he opened his mouth, the words stuck in his throat. Because in her eyes, in that single blazing moment before she lowered her gaze, he had seen something terrifying and pure, choice. Not coercion, not fear. Something else entirely. The human diplomats shifted uncomfortably, exchanging hurried whispers. Some saw opportunity, political leverage beyond measure. Others saw danger, an insult that might ignite war if misinterpreted. "Lieutenant," one of the generals hissed through gritted teeth. "Do not respond. Stay still." But Reeve couldn't. Every instinct screamed at him that this was more than politics. This was personal. She had chosen him for reasons he could not yet grasp. And the weight of that choice pressed down on his chest like a physical force. The chamber seemed to tilt, the vast stars beyond the glass spinning slowly, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. For the first time in years, Reeve felt truly seen. Not as a weapon, not as a soldier to be deployed, but as a man. The warrior before him wasn't offering submission. She was entrusting him with something deeper, perhaps even her people's future. And so he stood there, frozen, his world turned upside down, as the echoes of her bow rippled across the galaxy. The silence that followed Commander Sharel's bow did not last long. Within seconds, the chamber erupted into chaos. Alien voices rose in a storm of snarls, guttural growls, and hissing threats. The Veari delegation's composure shattered as their leaders leapt to their feet, their scaled hands slamming the table, their spines flaring in rage. The meaning of Sharel's bow was unmistakable to them. It was the ritual of Yrrhka, the ancient submission. In their culture, no warrior bowed except in absolute surrender of loyalty. And she had not bowed to her own kind, nor to her king, nor even to the Dominion's High Lord. She had bowed to a human. To the Veari, humanity was still an unproven species. They had joined the Galactic Concord barely 40 years ago, a blink of time to races that measured their history in millennia. Humans were clever, resourceful, and dangerous, yes, but fragile. Compared to the Veari, humans lacked natural armor, lacked claws, lacked spines that could turn aside blades. They were soft-fleshed creatures who relied on their machines to stand equal in battle. And yet Sharel had offered herself to one of them. The alien lord seated nearest to her, the warlord Karthak, roared with such fury that the holographic displays above the table flickered. He slammed a clawed hand against the obsidian surface hard enough to send cracks spidering through it. "Sharel, you dishonor the Dominion." His voice was thick with venom, his spines bristling like a predator ready to strike. No warrior of the Fong bows to prey. Her head remained lowered. Her voice was calm, steady, but carried a force that silenced even her own kind. "This one is not prey." The chamber rippled with outrage. On the human side, diplomats leaned close, whispering fiercely. Some were panicking, others calculating. Ambassador Lee, her dark suit shimmering faintly with biolight threads, muttered, "This could destabilize everything. If the Veari believe she has transferred loyalty, it could be interpreted as treason. Or worse, provocation." General Vance, his exoskeletal braces humming faintly as he leaned forward, frowned deeply. "We cannot allow this to be misconstrued. One wrong step and we're in a war the fleet isn't ready for." His eyes flicked to Reeve, who still stood motionless in the spotlight of Sharel's choice. "Lieutenant, do nothing. Do you understand me?" Not a word. But do nothing wasn't exactly an option. Reeve could feel the weight of every eye in the room boring into him, human and alien alike. His palms were slick with sweat, his throat tight. He had no training for this. He was a soldier, not a diplomat. His battles were fought with rifles and dropships, not symbols and gestures that could ignite empires. Yet as the shouting intensified, he saw something in the faces of the Veari that struck him. Fury, yes. Shock, yes. But beneath it all fear. Fear of what her bow meant. Fear of what humans might represent if one of their greatest warriors chose one of them. The meaning of this act ran deeper than he understood. The clash of cultures was not just in words. It was in the very marrow of their beliefs. For humans, respect could be shown in a bow, a salute, a handshake. It was ritual, not submission. But for the Veari, to bow was to bind. To kneel was to place one's life in another's hands, irrevocably. It was sacred, ancient, and unbreakable. To them, Sharel had just bound herself to Lieutenant Daniel Reeve. He saw it dawning in their eyes. Hatred from some, confusion from others, and from a few, curiosity. Karthak roared again, rising fully from his seat. His shadow fell across the chamber like a blade. "This is unacceptable. You would give your loyalty to a human." His claws scraped the table as he leaned forward. "This is heresy against the Dominion. And you," his burning eyes snapped to Reeve, "you will reject her, or you will face consequences that no machine of yours can protect you from." The room crackled with tension. Reeve's heart thudded like a war drum. He opened his mouth, but no words came. What could he say? If he accepted her bow, the Dominion might declare war on Earth. If he rejected it, he might insult her beyond repair, destroy whatever fragile bridge she was trying to build. And then Sharel lifted her head. Her glowing eyes locked on him. In that moment Reeve understood. It wasn't politics. It wasn't strategy. It was choice. Worse. And somehow, she had decided that humanity was worth that choice. That he was worth it. The clash was not only between humans and Veari. It was between two ways of thinking. Domination versus cooperation, fear versus trust. She had staked everything on that difference. Ambassador Lee whispered urgently in his ear. "Lieutenant, remain silent. Let us handle this." But Reeve could feel the eyes of history watching him. To stay silent now felt like betrayal. Of her. And perhaps of humanity's chance to be seen as more than fragile newcomers. His lips parted. His throat tightened. He hadn't spoken yet, but already the decision was forming, heavy as a blade in his chest. And as the chamber burned with fury and confusion, humanity's fragile place in the galaxy hung by a thread, held in the silence of one soldier and the defiance of one alien woman. The chamber had nearly dissolved into chaos. Veari delegates shouted over one another, spines rattling in agitation, while human diplomats exchanged tense whispers behind half-shielded hands. The air itself seemed alive, thick with suspicion and anger. But at the center of it all, Lieutenant Daniel Reeve stood caught between two worlds, one demanding rejection, the other demanding silence. Sharel's bow still burned in his mind. The weight of it pressed on him with every second, a silent command that he did not understand but could not ignore. Her choice seemed impossible. She was power incarnate, a warrior sung about across star systems, and she had bent her knee to him. To the Veari, the act was binding, absolute. To humans it was baffling. But to Reeve, a soldier who had spent years watching leaders sacrifice soldiers for numbers on a page, it felt different, felt real. He looked at Cheryl. She knelt, unwavering, though he could see the ripple of tension in her shoulders. She was not cowed. She was not broken. She had chosen this, and she bore the storm of outrage with the calm of a mountain weathering lightning strikes. Reeve realized then that the others in this chamber were seeing her bow as a symbol of weakness, of surrender. But what he saw was strength, because it took strength to choose trust in a galaxy built on domination. And that, he realized, was humanity's hidden weapon. The Veari had built their empire on dominance. The strong ruled, the weak obeyed. Honor was carved in scars, loyalty enforced with blood. Every culture they touched was measured against their hierarchy of strength. But humans didn't quite fit. Fragile in body, yes, but relentless in spirit. Their history wasn't written by the strongest surviving alone, but by cooperation, by lifting one another when the odds were impossible. They fought not because they loved war, but because they loved each other too much to surrender. That difference was why Cheryl's bow mattered. She had seen something in him, or in humanity, that the Dominion had missed. Something the others would never understand unless he showed them. Reeve's hands clenched at his sides. His training screamed for silence, for obedience to the chain of command. But his instincts, the same instincts that had kept him alive through ambushes and battles in the void, told him that this was a different battlefield, one where silence was death. Slowly he raised his voice. "This isn't submission," he said, his words cutting through the roar of the chamber. The humans stiffened, horrified that he had broken protocol. The Veari froze, shocked that he dared speak at all. "What she's done, it's not weakness. It's courage. Greater courage than I've ever seen." Karthak snarled, his spines flaring. "She kneels. Yields. That is weakness." Reeve met his gaze, unflinching. "No, it's strength. Because choosing to trust someone, especially someone who isn't like you, that takes more bravery than lifting a blade." The room fell silent again. The human diplomats looked as if they wanted to melt into their chairs. But among the Veari, the reaction was mixed. Some glared with outrage, but others shifted uneasily, as if the humans' words had struck something they didn't want to acknowledge. Reeve pressed on, his voice steady, his chest tight with adrenaline. "You think humanity is fragile because we don't have claws, because our skin doesn't stop blades, because we build armor instead of growing it. But you don't understand. Those very things forced us to find another kind of strength. We survive not because of our bodies but because we stand together. We build for each other. We fight for each other. We trust each other. That's our strength." He glanced down at Cheryl, still bowed before him, and his voice softened. "And she saw that. She saw something you refused to see. That sometimes the strongest thing you can do is kneel, not because you are beaten, but because you choose to stand with someone else." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Cheryl rose. Slowly, deliberately, she stood tall again, towering over him once more. But instead of reclaiming her place among her people, she remained at his side. Her luminous eyes scanned the chamber, daring anyone to deny what had just been said. "I bow," she declared, her voice carrying like a war horn, "because this human understands what strength truly is. Not conquest, not fear, trust. He stands as one who could wield my blade, because he would never demand it. He would never ask it. He would only earn it." The chamber shook with divided cries. Some Veari shouted in outrage, demanding her removal, her exile. Others murmured in doubt, their expressions shifting as though centuries of tradition had suddenly cracked. And amidst the storm, Daniel Reeve felt something stirring deep within him. Not pride, not arrogance, but purpose. For the first time, he understood what humanity had to offer the galaxy. Not fleets, not weapons, not machines, though they had plenty of those. What they had was something rarer. The ability to inspire trust. Reeves' pulse hammered in his chest, but he didn't back down. He stood firm beside her, meeting the eyes of every alien who glared at him. And in that moment, for the first time in the history of the Dominion, a human wasn't seen as fragile prey. He was seen as something else entirely. The roar of voices filled the chamber again. Outrage, disbelief, fury. Sharel's declaration had split the Dominion delegation down the middle. Some demanded her execution for treason. Others watched her with wide, uncertain eyes. But it was Warlord Karthak who rose above them all, his massive frame casting a shadow across the obsidian floor. His spines arched like the blades of a warship, his eyes blazing. "This cannot stand," he growled, pointing a claw toward Reeve. "A human cannot command the loyalty of one of our greatest warriors, unless he proves himself here. By the ancient law of trial." A hush swept through the chamber. Trial by combat. The old way. Blood and steel, strength against strength. Reeves' chest tightened. His fists clenched as he felt every gaze swing toward him. He knew what was being asked. This wasn't just about him, it was about humanity. About whether they were worthy in the eyes of the Dominion. Sharel stepped forward instantly, her voice sharp as a blade. "If there must be trial, then I will stand. My choice, my fight." But Karthak sneered. "No. The one you bow to must prove himself. Or your bow is nothing." Reeve swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed at him that he would be walking into death. Karthak was a mountain of muscle, claws, and armored hide. But as fear coiled around his spine, Reeve remembered his own words. Humanity's strength is not in claws, but in trust. And he realized he wasn't alone. "I'll fight," he said quietly. His voice carried like a gunshot in the silence. "But not with your rules." Karthak laughed, a sound like rolling thunder. "Then you are already dead, human." Reeves' hand moved to the device at his wrist. The exobrace hummed to life, silver veins of light tracing up his arm. With a hiss of hydraulics, his combat harness deployed, wrapping his chest and legs in reinforced plating. His helmet sealed into place with a click, and the HUD lit his vision with tactical readouts. The Viari scoffed. Machines. Always hiding behind machines. But Reeves stood tall. "We build because we must. We adapt. That's why we survive." The duel began. Karthak struck first, a blur of claws and brute force. Reeve barely sidestepped, the HUD flashing red warnings. His exobrace absorbed the glancing blow, but the sheer impact rattled his bones. Sparks scattered across the chamber floor. The second strike came faster. Reeve ducked under it, rolling to the side. His training surged back to him. Urban combat drills, ambush tactics, the desperate lessons learned in trenches where failure meant death. He wasn't the strongest. He never had been. But strength wasn't the human way. He waited. Looked for patterns in Karthak's rage. The alien fought with overwhelming dominance. Every blow meant to crush, to terrify. But with every missed strike, every sidestep, Reeve found his rhythm. And then he struck back. Not with brute force, but with precision. His wrist guard snapped open, firing a shock pulse that sent blue arcs of energy crawling over Karthak's scales. The warlord roared, staggering. It wasn't enough to fell him, but it slowed him. Reeve pressed forward, using speed over strength. The exobrace enhanced his agility. his blows striking weak points where scales overlapped. His mind raced, tactics unfolding like maps. Every move wasn't just about defeating Karthak. It was about proving that humanity fought differently. Martyr. Together. Because even as he fought, he wasn't truly alone. Sharelle called out warnings in her own tongue, her voice sharp with urgency. Human generals relayed tactical data through his HUD, feeding him readings on the warlord's vitals, his stance, his weakening armor. Piece by piece, strike by strike, Reeve wore him down. The final moment came when Karthak lunged with all his strength, claws aiming for Reeve's throat. Instead of retreating, Reeve stepped into the attack. His exobrace absorbed the impact, and with a roar of his own, he drove his shock blade upward, sliding it into the vulnerable seam at Karthak's shoulder. The warlord howled, dropping to one knee. Reeve didn't finish him. He didn't need to. Instead, he stepped back, lowering his weapon. "I don't fight to kill," he said, his voice echoing in the silent chamber. "I fight to stand, to endure, to prove that humanity doesn't need to dominate to be strong." For the first time, Karthak's furious eyes wavered. He looked not at a fragile creature hiding behind machines, but at a warrior who had bested him with courage, cunning, and restraint. Sharelle moved to Reeve's side, lifting her chin proudly. "You see now. This is why I bowed. Not to weakness, to strength of another kind." The chamber erupted again, but not with fury. This time with uncertainty. With awe. Some Vayari still hissed in outrage, but others bowed their heads slightly, acknowledging what they had witnessed. Humanity, the so-called fragile newcomers, had stood against one of the Dominion's fiercest warlords, and endured. Ambassador Lee seized the moment, her voice cutting through the chamber like a commander on the battlefield. "Let it be known that Earth seeks not conquest but respect. Today you have seen what we offer. Not just weapons, not just machines, but courage, loyalty, and trust. Qualities that bind stronger than chains of blood." The council fell silent. The balance had shifted. For the first time, humans were no longer seen as fragile prey or convenient allies. They were something new. Something dangerous in their own way. Something that could not be dismissed. And as the chamber adjourned, Sharelle walked beside Reeve, her expression unreadable. Only when they reached the quiet of the corridor did she finally speak. "You did not win because of your machines," she said softly. "You won because you did not fight for yourself alone." Reeve met her gaze, exhaustion heavy in his limbs. "Neither did you when you bowed." For a long moment, the alien warrior studied him. Then, with the faintest hint of a smile, something no human had ever seen from her, she inclined her head once more. Not in submission, not in ritual, but in respect. And with that, the galaxy changed forever.